I've had people tell me like, "Oh, don't publish so much research showing the benefits or do podcasts
And
because
go up.
yeah, people are going to find out about this and the price is going to go way up." So, but right now it's super safe. Maybe stock up on it.
We always say food first, supplement second. But is food enough?
When I started out my research career, I studied caffeine, protein, all these different things. But creatine has been a recent interest of mine because it does so many other things besides just enhancing muscle.
Who's Scott Forbes? So Scott, thank you so much for your time. I know you're a really busy man. I've seen lots of your research and I've read a lot of your articles, but for people that haven't, who's Scott Forbes?
Okay, so I'm currently an assistant professor at Brandon University in Manitoba, Canada. So I'm an academic, I'm a scientist. I study a lot of sport nutrition and focus a lot of my research on creatine, at least in the recent years. So looking at the effects of creatine on muscle, but also bone and brain health as well.
That's also something we need to touch on because people think it as a bodybuilding supplement and it's beyond that.
Absolutely.
So Canada, we love Canada. And we love, oh yeah. So creatine, an antioxidant, a neuromodulator, and a key regulator for, I don't want to say, let's say optimizing metabolism, correct?
Yeah, exactly. It's an energy source, both for your muscles, but also for your brain as well.
How, like, let's start with neuromodulator. A lot of people ask, so it's not only performing in the gym. What does it do?
Yeah, so well, both in the muscle and the brain, it kind of works the same way as an energy source. That's what I'm going to talk about. So when you take creatine, so you could either get that in a food source or through a supplement that goes into your bloodstream. That can either be, most of it, about 95% of it is stored within your muscle.
Okay.
But there's still 5% remaining, and some of that goes into your brain as well. And so if it gets converted into phosphocreatine, then that's a stored potential energy. So anytime you're doing an energy demanding task, so for example, running, sprinting, or a cognitive demanding task like thinking or things like that, then it requires some energy, and it can use that phosphocreatine. You could break it down and you can create energy from it. So it's both beneficial for the muscle and the brain, but it acts through several other mechanisms as well. Potentially it's an antioxidant, and it also stimulates at the muscle. It also stimulates several other potentially growth promoting factors as well. Things like through water retention, it can stimulate, it's called myogenic regulatory factors, increased satellite cells and things like that, that have been all implicated in muscle growth.
So do you think because of the modulators you just told me before, do you think it has any potential affecting insulin?
Yeah, definitely. There's a couple rat studies, for example, where they showed that creatine increases the mRNA of GLUT4, and GLUT4 is the glucose transporter at the muscle, and potentially can increase insulin sensitivity. I believe there's one study done in humans in diabetics, and it showed, yeah, it showed some beneficial effects of creatine supplementation. So we actually did a study in healthy individuals, young females, and we made them do high intensity interval training with and without creatine. And we looked at, we took fasting insulin and fasting glucose. And so we used those as indicators of insulin sensitivity. And in those individuals, it actually had no effect, but their insulin sensitivity was already really good. Okay. So there's some evidence that, for example, like high intensity interval training can be very effective at improving insulin sensitivity. but even the high intensity interval training in those particular participants had no effect on their insulin sensitivity. So the impact of creatine is probably much smaller compared to exercise. So it wasn't too much of a surprise when we found no effect on those individuals. But in diabetics, for example, it might be
type 2, correct?
yeah, it was type
It
2
was type 2,
diabetics. Yeah. Yeah, I believe it was research from out of Brazil.
yeah. I'm not sure if it was either Will Brink or Dr. Casey Nadolski that posted a paper regarding that.
Okay, yeah. I believe his name is Bruno. I forget
Yeah,
his last name, but yeah.
true. Yeah. I read that paper. It was really interesting because they began to do it for a different reason, and they found out how it can affect insulin sensitivity, and it's going to be really an interesting thing because we need more research on it. But
Yeah, definitely.
it's more than meets the eye, creatine. You know better.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty crazy how it can impact so many different things. And yeah, like when I started out my research career, I studied caffeine, protein, all these different things, but creatine has been a recent interest of mine because it does so many other things besides just enhancing muscle, for example. But
Also, you said protein. I think protein and creatine are the most well-researched supplements um, out there. Am I correct? Or
yeah, absolutely. I would throw caffeine in there as well,
and
but
caffeine, yeah.
yeah, but there's a lot of research on those dietary supplements in a variety of different populations, from diabetes to heart disease to cognitive
Anti-aging.
problems to aging, older adults. We've done a few studies in those individuals, so yeah, there's lots of different research out there with regards to those supplements.
Let's take it from the beginning. Let's go, like, we know fatigue during exercise appears to be at least partially related to phosphagen pathways, correct?
Yeah,
Ha-
especially specific types of exercise. Yeah.
High intensity usually.
Yeah.
So how would people think usually, CrossFitters, people that do high intensity, oh, I need creatine. What happens to the people in an aerobic pathway? Like people are gonna run, they're just gonna, low intensity, steady state, something like that. They're gonna benefit too.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a couple benefits at the muscle level. Um, so for example, it can actually help transport energy, so ATP, from the mitochondria to where the contractile proteins
Hmm.
within the muscle. So it acts as an antioxidant by helping to transport that as well.
Hmm.
We haven't actually seen any increases in whole body VO2 max with creatine supplementation, but there's some evidence, especially in certain, especially again certain types of exercise like cycling, for example. Even if you're doing a long duration cycling, if you take creatine, you can increase the amount of like sprints that you can do in a race, and especially high level competition where you have to do multiple like surges and things like that to keep up with other competitors or break away from the pack. Creatine might be really effective to enhance aerobic performance as well. Um, there's a study that I'm aware of in runners where they actually show that there's a detriment to creatine. So the rationale they gave was that you gain body weight with creatine.
That's
And
something.
so if you
Yeah.
gain body weight, then obviously a weight bearing sport like running, for example, it might actually impair your performance. But for cycling or swimming, there's evidence that it could actually be a benefit.
To go back, why? Because a lot of people are like, oh, I don't want to get creatine. I'm going to put some weight on. How can we touch on that? Why? How? And
Yeah.
then I want to go through because there's so many forms of creatine. I always keep it, old school. Creatine monohydrate has most research. We've seen the benefits. That's what I use. But before we go through the types and what research says, why do we put water?
Yeah, so it increases the osmolarity of the cell, so it takes in more water. Just like if you carbo load, for example, if you
Yeah.
consume carbohydrates, you retain more water. So every gram of carbohydrate, you
2.7 grams of
yeah,
water.
it's about 3 grams of water. So same thing with creatine as well. So it causes that increase in water retention. There was actually a cool study from McMaster University, so where Stu Phillips is from.
Yeah.
But this was from Tarnopolsky, and he looked at these all these mechanisms and at the cellular level what was upregulated, and they showed that things that were associated with an increase in osmolarity. So when you take creatine, these osmosensing cells signal a cascade of events that ultimately lead to things that are related to muscle growth. So people are always like, oh, it just increases water retention. That's bad. But in reality, that water retention is actually stimulating the muscle to grow. Yeah. So it's actually a good thing. People are like, oh, it's making me puffy. I'm like, oh, you're lucky. You're a responder to creatine. Like, that's awesome.
So we have non-responders and responders.
Yeah, just like any other supplement drug out there. So this was actually my PhD supervisor, Gordon Bell, and another professor. He's retired now, but at the University of Alberta, Dan Sirtak. They gave a bunch of young individuals creatine, and they looked at who responded and who didn't respond as much to creatine. And there was two main factors. One, the people who responded better had lower muscle creatine content to start with.
Okay.
So if
Maybe
they just had
start with.
Yeah, so sorry, the people who responded better had less muscle creatine content to start with. Sorry, I said that wrong. Like vegetarians, for example, they typically get less in their diet and they have less in their muscles, so they respond better to creatine. And the other factor was they had more fast twitch muscle fibers.
Okay.
So again, those are the types of muscle fibers that typically are important for high intensity exercise. They typically have more creatine, or they can perhaps have the greater ability to store more creatine within them. So they tend to respond better. So there's those two factors. So they had lower amounts of starting creatine content and more fast twitch fibers.
So how can lay individual find out if he is a responder or not? Is there?
So yeah, that's a difficult question. I've had people ask me that before. Essentially, you can try it out and yeah, just try to track things as much as possible. Try not to change anything else, and just see if you
Gain weight.
Yeah, gain weight or yeah, just get stronger, bigger muscles in the gym. But obviously, that takes time. Yeah, so it's hard to know actually if you're truly a responder or not without taking a muscle biopsy and seeing how much creatine is actually in your muscle.
But you will see a difference regarding, as we said before, for brain, for cognitive function. That would be an effect. We might not see an effect, let's say in the gym. I might see it somewhere else that it's more needed, correct? Or
yeah, exactly. I kind of hate the terms responders and non-responders for that reason, because it's a non-responder to at the muscle, but they might respond in other areas. And for example, they might get smarter, they might increase their memory, they might increase their decision making, their bones might get better, their insulin sensitivity might get better, all those things, right? So just because one variable didn't increase in those individuals doesn't mean it's not going to increase in other places. So
excellent point, because I've got a lot of people sometimes like, oh, I don't get creatine, because we're going to talk later on, because a lot of people are afraid of it, especially parents. We've got athletes, because I train young athletes sometimes, and I'm like, we need to do that because he trains more than the lay student, so we need to implement some supplements that truly work. He's a student, he trains a lot, we need to do this. Like, oh, I don't want my kid to be on drugs. And I was like, okay, let's start from the start and explain what creatine is and what it isn't.
For sure.
What are the types of creatine that are out there, and which ones do really work?
Yeah, so there's a whole. I'm kind of on the same page as you. Creatine monohydrate has been the most studied, and there's over 500 studies, for example, on creatine monohydrate. There's probably more than that as well.
Yeah.
Um, but it's been shown to be super safe. But yeah, there's the most evidence that it actually enhances exercise performance. The most evidence that it's safe to use, and so I always stick to creatine monohydrate. There's been other forms that are trying to show that they're better at absorption, but creatine monohydrate, as long as you can mix it in water, is absorbed very, very well. And so even if you can increase absorption somehow, it wouldn't be that much superior to creatine monohydrate. And creatine monohydrate is probably the cheapest form out there. So
Sure.
all these companies will try to sell you on all these other things. But in reality, yeah, just stick with creatine monohydrate. That's what the evidence says right now.
And it's crazy with all these benefits, the price is just ridiculous.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a super cheap supplement.
Yeah.
So, yeah, same thing. I've had people tell me like, "Oh, don't publish so much research showing the benefits or do podcasts
Gonna
because
go up.
yeah, people are going to find out about this and the price is going to go way up." So, but right now it's super safe. Maybe stock up on it. Yeah.
That's my next question regarding on dosage. A lot of people back in the days, it was like, oh, try 5 days on 20 grams and then start putting it down on 5. We see a lot of research now that's, and that was for a month. And then they said, oh, 6 weeks out, then do it again, like cycling it. Now
Yep.
you see that people say do it forever for 5 grams. But then again, if it's a 80 kilo individual and a 120 kilo individual, doesn't that change a bit how much this guy will need?
Yeah. So there's in 1996 there was a study that gave it. They did a 5-day loading phase, and they gave 20 grams per day, and they basically showed that you saturate the muscle in 5 days. So the muscle creatine content increased about 20% on average in those individuals. And then they put them on 2 grams a day for the remainder of the study, which lasted a total of 28 days. And they were able to maintain muscle saturation with just 2 grams a day after it was saturated. Another group just got 3 grams a day for the 28 days, and it showed that they were able to saturate the muscle to the same level as the group that did that loading phase. So people always ask that, do you need to load? Do you not need to load? Um, if you want to save your money, I guess, and even though it's a cheap supplement, you don't need to load. You can just do 3 grams a day, and eventually your muscle will get up. It'll take a little bit longer. So if you want the increase in creatine content as quickly as possible, then yeah, you can do that loading phase. It's also perfectly fine to do. So that's kind of the first study that looked at that dose response.
Okay.
The second question you asked was about cycling. There's no studies to actually show that you need to cycle or you don't need to cycle. So we need to run that study because I
Yeah.
think so many people ask that question, like, do you have to do it or not have to do it? We've done studies where we've given creatine every single day for an entire year, and we've shown no negative side effects from that.
And you were giving
And
how much for a year per
so
day?
so yeah, so we actually give a relative amount. So in theory, it makes sense that that a bigger person might need a little bit more. If you have more muscle, for example, you're gonna take up more creatine. Um, so we actually give 0.1 grams per kilogram of body weight. So again, there's no evidence to show that that relative dosing is better than just giving 3 grams or 5 grams per day. So somebody's going to have to do that study as well to show if there is a difference. Or maybe bigger people will need more creatine. Again, that's just a theory. There's no actual science to support that, but that's typically what we do in our research studies is we give 0.1 grams per kilogram per day.
And you've seen it's more efficient especially with athletes or people that are active, because it's going to be different with a person that's sedentary and a person that's active, and especially using high twitch muscles, right?
Yeah, exactly. But we've given that to older adults, but we also prescribe a resistance training program as well with them. So we make them get active even if they're not active. So yeah,
Yeah.
the benefits of creatine, especially at the muscle level, seems to be the most effective when it's stressed. So you need to stress the muscle with exercise. If you just took creatine, you're hoping that your muscles will grow. It's not going to happen.
I
Yeah,
wish.
unfortunately, you have to exercise as well.
Yeah. Before, after, or during the exercise would
Yeah,
be preferable.
yeah. So there's actually been 3 studies that looked at creatine before training versus after training, and none of those studies actually showed a difference between those two. But when you put those 3 studies together, because they were pretty small sample sizes, so if you put those 3 studies together, it shows that after was slightly better for increasing muscle mass compared to before training. We're actually doing a within subject design right now where they train one side of their body one day and they'll get creatine before on, say, their right side, and then they train the other side of their body the next day, and if they got creatine before on their right side, they get creatine after on their left side. And we're looking at changes in muscle mass and size. So we have 10 subjects totally completed that training study, and there's no difference between. So when you do a within subject design, and that eliminates between subject differences like genetics or dietary intake, sleep, all those things that potentially can impact muscle growth or increases in size or strength over time. We eliminate those with the within subject design. No difference for timing. So
Okay. Well,
yeah, so
wouldn't play a role because we said before about what happens to GLUT4 and insulin sensitivity may be there, but for specific population, we might see something because it plays a
yeah,
role in insulin. So especially after training, you want that kind of, or during that, let's say ATP storage to move up.
yeah, exactly. So we're doing a couple other studies as well. We have a study going on with a collaborator at the University of Regina, Darren Kando. One of his grad students there is running a creatine during study to show if that's effective or not.
Well,
So after each set, essentially they take a sip, and it's all controlled. So yeah, they take a sip of creatine and then do another sip of creatine. So it's between set creatine supplementation, and they're not looking at insulin sensitivity, but they're looking at changes in muscle size and strength over time.
that'll be really interesting.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see what they find.
Uh, s- uh, we always say food first, supplement second. But is food enough? And I know herring, for example, is like one of the highest foods with creatine. Then we've got red meat, liver, stuff like that. But what's your opinion? We need it, or is it something we can eat every day and keep our creatine phosphates high up, or we need that extra 3 grams a day?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and you can get creatine in herring, but you just have to eat about just over a pound a day of herring. So if you're committed to that,
No,
that's a lot of herring. If you want to do it with beef or cod, for example, you just have to eat over 3.5 pounds of those every single day. If you want to do it with milk, you just have to consume about 200 cups of milk a day.
Whew.
So it's very difficult to get enough from food sources. There are food sources, but to
Yeah,
truly saturate your muscle, this is probably the only supplement out there that you actually need to supplement with to maximize the effects of it.
perfect. Yeah, because a lot of people say that because it's the same thing with, with vegans. Oh, I get my protein and I get my vitamins, and I'm like, well, in order to get the same amount, you need this kind of amount in order to
Yeah.
get. And I'm not sure it's going to be bioavailable as getting it through specific routes. Scott, how can we make creatine more efficient? Because we know caffeine works perfectly with creatine, and there's a lot of research on it. Anything else we need to know, or how do we do it? Because we know that half-life is 4 hours caffeine. Should we get creatine with an espresso an hour before training, or?
Yeah, so there's some evidence that taking it with caffeine, they might be doing some of the opposite effects. So Eric Trexler and Abby Smith-Ryan, for example, have written a nice review looking at the potential of where if you take creatine and caffeine at the same time, that might be bad. But actually, nobody has done a training study with creatine and caffeine at the same time. So again, my collaborator at University of Regina is currently doing that study right now. So we're doing a training study with creatine and caffeine to see if it actually impacts muscle growth and muscle size over time. So there's four groups in that study, so it's a pretty big study. So
Oh,
there's
wow.
creatine alone, caffeine alone, a placebo, and creatine and
Right.
caffeine combined. Yeah, so we'll really find out whether taking those at the same time is
Beneficial.
bad or not, or it might actually be beneficial as well. Yeah, we don't know. There's some evidence, for example, Brad Schoenfeld has shown that they've done a systematic review looking at caffeine and showing that if you take that pre-workout, you can increase some of the resistance training adaptations.
Yeah, Louise Burke on her book also has caffeine for performance. It has really, really valid research on caffeine by itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And then there's some evidence that if you take creatine with carbohydrates,
Yeah, that was
that you can increase more the uptake of creatine into the muscle. So that's one way to do that. Or you can take creatine with carbohydrate protein mix. So the one study that looked at the creatine uptake, it was from Paul Greenhoff, and he gave 100 grams of carbohydrates with the creatine. That's a lot of carbohydrates. And then the other condition was you took 50 grams of carbohydrates with 50 grams of protein with the creatine, and you got the same amount of uptake. So do you need that much? Probably not. But that was the one study that looked at the combination of creatine and carbohydrates or carbohydrate protein mix to increase creatine uptake.
Any other valid way of increasing the efficiency of creatine?
So those are probably the two best ways, I guess, is just take it with, maybe take it after exercise. There's also a pretty cool study from Paul Greenhoff as well, where they did single leg exercise, and then they consumed ingested creatine, and they showed that the leg that exercised took up more creatine than the leg that didn't exercise. So it seems like the leg, like if you do exercise, it sensitizes the creatine transporters, and maybe you get more blood flow to that area as well.
Which makes sense,
So that might be another mechanism to suggest why taking it after exercise might actually be better.
Then, yeah.
Potentially, yeah. It's a small effect, I think.
But especially in elite performance, we want like even 1% is a medal.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So yeah, anything that can help, we want it.
Yeah. So if I was an elite athlete, I'd probably take it after exercise just to try to maximize those benefits. But
yeah,
based off the available literature, it's hard for me to conclusively say that after is actually better than before. Yeah.
Does the pathway of creatine inhibits the absorption of any other nutrients? Like we know we know iron inhibits iodine, and that's why we separate it, even though they're multivitamins that have everything in. But does have we seen any inhibition when we get creatine of any malabsorbance or affecting any other pathway metabolically?
No, I don't think so. Yeah, I don't think there's any evidence for that, but
Perfect.
yeah, I don't know. Do you
Well,
know of any studies?
no, that's why I'm asking, because I've
Yeah,
tried to find some and I haven't
yeah,
found any. I know some people, when they used to load, they had some GI tract problems.
yeah,
You would, as anybody would. Like I'm doing research now regarding Boswellia, curcumin, and vitis as anti-inflammatory for osteoarthritis. And
okay,
out of 30 people, like maybe some might say, but it's because of the amount, and some will because they have
yeah.
to. But no, with creatine, I haven't found anything else. The What are the dangers of creatine, and what is high dose on creatine? Because there's a sea
Yeah.
of misinterpretation out there. So
Yeah, so typically it's a very safe supplement. There are some people that get some GI distress, and typically that's associated with that loading phase when they're taking 20 grams a day for 5 days.
a lot of water in too.
Yeah, exactly. So usually I just recommend they take that lower dose. You can take 3 grams a day. That's much less than 20 grams, and you can still get the same benefits over time with that. And then it will minimize the effects of the GI distress. It's easier on their bodies. And then perhaps taking it after exercise as well is maybe another strategy, because if you take it before exercise, then if you have GI distress, that might impair your exercise performance. So again, another kind of reasoning to perhaps take it after exercise. Um, but yeah, so there are some people that get some of those side effects like GI distress associated with it, but I would just suggest to them to take a lower amount and to continue the supplementation.
Um, any difference between women and men? I had a,
Potentially,
I had a question from a woman saying, "Do
yeah.
I stop? Do I continue during my cycle?" I was like, "I haven't found anything." I say the same. You've got a lot more experience.
Yeah. So there's some studies that have included both men and women, and a lot of the studies that we do in older adults, we actually can combine both men and women. And typically, we actually show no difference between those between the two genders. For example, we ran that one study where we did interval training with creatine. That was in females only, and they didn't respond to the creatine. And we replicated that study off of a study that was done in males only.
Hmm.
And the males, they showed some benefits, but in the female population that we tested, we didn't show a benefit. So I believe there needs to be more studies to look at potential gender differences. And there's some studies that will suggest that, oh, there is a gender effect. And then there's other studies that say, no, we tested for this. We found no gender effect at all. So if there is one, it's probably very, very small.
Small.
Yeah.
And again, to go back to the dangers in the past, it was same thing like Jose Antonio was talking about protein, GFR, glomerular filtration rate. Do we have any problems regarding that? I know you answered the question where you said we've got a longitudinal study for a year that
Yeah.
nothing changed.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, exactly. It's a super safe supplement for your kidneys and liver. Your body naturally produces creatine. So people are always like, "Oh, it's dangerous," and I'm like, if your body would net
yeah, well,
produces it,
yeah.
why would it's not a danger. And yeah, we've given the supplement for up to a year. I know other researchers have given it for 2 years. So they've done pretty long studies with this and shown no detrimental effects, no serious side effects associated with supplementing with creatine. So it's a super safe supplement.
Did you
One
change
of the safest out there.
Did you change the modulation rate? Because, sometimes when you get a specific, like, it's same thing with glutamate, for example, when you add more, your brain doesn't stimulate the same oh God, my English. Adaptation. So you might have things in, but the key's there, but you know the keyhole says I don't want it. It's wrong key.
Yeah, that's a interesting question. It seems like even if you've taken creatine for a long time, if you go off it, um,
Nothing changes.
yeah, your muscle creatine content where it started. So if you supplement with creatine, you're going to increase the muscle creatine content. And then if you stop creatine, it takes about 4 to 6 weeks for it to return back to baseline.
Okay.
But it goes back to baseline. So some people are like, oh, does it, like turn off your pancreas
No,
and
the
things
cell will
from.
die.
Yeah, it continues to function. And even if you stop taking creatine, you just go back to where you were before.
Yeah.
It's not going to, shut down those engines that are producing the creatine within your body. So yeah, it's pretty safe for sure.
Yes. I've seen a lot of research. One thing I want to cover is the brain injury, and I've seen a lot of research talking about creatine and brain-derived neurotrophic factor, the BDNF. So we see for neuroplasticity, increasing the neural pathways. I know you did a seminar with the ISSN. Was it 2 months ago?
Yeah, at the Society of Neurosports.
Yes.
So they're affiliated with the ISSN, or Jose Antonio was there, but Jamie Tartar has started up the Society of Neurosports, which is an awesome organization.
Following them, it's the work they do is just amazing.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. So yeah, I talked about some of the benefits of creatine on brain, and there's definitely some evidence that if you take creatine, if you supplement with creatine, you could actually increase the brain creatine content. So you get more creatine within your brain. It's a lot more variable than what happens in the muscle. It's not as predictable, but on average, it's about a 10% increase in brain creatine content. And then associated with more creatine in your brain, it seems like cognitive processing, things like memory, executive function, like decision-making abilities, they improve with creatine. But again, it's really variable between studies. Some studies show absolutely no effect. Some studies show a benefit. And it's hard to compare those studies because they often use different tools, different tests to measure those things. The one place where creatine seems to be consistently of benefit is when your brain is in a stressed situation. So just like your muscles, where you have to stress your muscles to see the benefit of creatine, same thing with your brain. So if you're a couple ways to stress your brain, sleep deprivation is one way to do that. And so there seems to be some benefit that we know cognition goes down when you're sleep deprived. If you take creatine, it goes down much less compared to if you're even if you are sleep deprived. But if you take creatine, you're sleep deprived, you're going to have almost no effect on your cognitive function. So no loss in your cognitive function, which is pretty cool. So that's been shown a couple times using computer tests. And then it's also been shown in rugby players as well. So they had them do so not concussions, but they were
really interesting because that's a huge stress.
yeah, exactly. So potentially, but this study in rugby players was just sleep deprivation.
Okay.
And they did a rugby passing, or so they had to pass the rugby ball, and they had to do it very accurately. And when they took creatine, they didn't lose their accuracy in that rugby passing drill. Whereas if they didn't take creatine and they were sleep deprived, then their passing went way down. So it might be important for athletes before a competition, for example, is you might be nervous, your sleep might be disturbed,
jet lag, yeah.
all those things. Like there might be some real importance for creatine during those situations. And then you mentioned, so if you have a concussion, for example, we know brain creatine content goes down in those situations. And so there's a theory that if you take creatine either before, it might be protective, or if you took creatine after a concussion, it might help with the recovery. And so there's one study done in rats where they took creatine and they caused a mild traumatic injury, brain injury to the rats, and the rats had much less brain damage when they were on creatine versus not on creatine. But translating that to humans is a pretty big step. But there's good rationale for why creatine could be effective in those situations. So somebody is going to do that study probably right away because it's really, really important. And there's good scientific rationale to support it as either neuroprotective or to help with the recovery following a concussion or a mild traumatic brain injury.
Because usually after brain injury, what they usually say is we want the cell to recover as fast as it can so we don't have any more complications. And usually they gave protein and creatine in order to help, besides saying, vitamin C, D3 now that it's saying that vitamin D will help a lot with recovery. But if there's so much, because I've seen a lot of research on concussion, I'm like, why not?
Yeah, there was a recent study in football players, retired NFL football players, so National Football League, and so like American football, I guess, just for clarification. But so they hit their heads a lot, and they basically looked at, they created this cumulative head impact score. So the more you hit your head, basically, the higher the score would go. And they correlated that with your brain creatine content. So the more you hit your head, the less creatine you would have in your brain. So that correlation was interesting to me. Again, it's hard to go much further than just saying it's a correlation. It's hard to say, maybe they should take creatine, or that would be protective, or that would help them recover. We don't know that yet, but we do know that there are these. Yeah, we do know these correlations exist out there. So
was a really nice, interesting, because we talk about anti-aging and aging and reverse aging, or came 2019. I saw on Springer, creatine, kinase, and aging. Can it reverse aging? Everybody's now looking at the telomeres and trying to see what creatine can do. What's the evidence now? Because I know you really interested in that.
Yeah, so there's been 3 or 4 meta-analyses looking at if you combine creatine with resistance training, that in older adults, so we typically define older adults as over the age of 50. So we'll include all the studies that looked at, again, resistance training with creatine versus placebo, and see if it had an impact on muscle mass and strength. And there's really good evidence that it does impact muscle size and strength. We actually did a meta-analysis in 2014, and Stu Phillips also did one, and we published them a month apart from each other. So he published it in a better journal than me, so I was a little upset about that. But I was very happy that the findings were the exact same. Yeah, so that was kind of nice. 2 completely different labs, 2 independent individuals published the exact same thing and show the exact same results. So I was confident. I was very confident in my results at that time that creatine can enhance muscle mass and strength. And subsequently, some researchers from Canada as well, Phil Chillibeck and Darren Kando, have also done a meta-analysis in 2017, updated it, and same results. In older adults, if you combine it with resistance training, you gain more muscle, and you gain more strength, both upper body and lower body. So it seems to be a benefit for those individuals.
What do you think is coming next on creatine? What's your journey? What's your I don't want to say dream because I don't like it. What are your new findings? What's going on?
Yeah, so
I know you're always you're really like so part of your research and of your talk And I know there's something more going on with brain-blood barrier and how it will affect the neuroadaptability and the neuromodulation of our body.
Yeah, so I think there needs to be more evidence for creatine to enhance cognition, especially in older adults as well. And perhaps Alzheimer's disease is one area that would be really interesting to look at, to see if creatine can, slow the cognitive decline. We know dementia is on the rise and there's no cure for dementia. So that's one area that would be of interest. But I would also like to do more studies looking at the impact of creatine on sport performance as well, from a cognitive perspective. Yeah, we have creatine during training, resistance training. We have a creatine following a stroke. So people have had a stroke, and we're looking at how that impacts cognition, but also how it impacts muscle and strength adaptations to resistance training. So we have some pretty cool studies coming down the pipeline.
Really interesting.
But yeah, so I think there's just more and more things that creatine can be of benefit to. And yeah, I'm just kind of interested in continuing to follow that path. And creatine and diabetes, for example.
Yeah, that was really interesting. That was shocking, actually. When I first saw that, I was like, what creatine cannot do?
Exactly. So I think there needs to be a big study to look at that to see if, creatine can truly impact insulin sensitivity in people that have diabetes. So that would be pretty cool to do a big randomized control trial to show that impact. Yeah, so there's lots of interesting things that you can definitely do with creatine supplementation. And there seems to be kind of, endless kind of things that you need to do. One study that I'd really like to do is looking at creatine cycling versus non-cycling, just to answer that question. I feel people have that question every single time.
By far.
And yeah, so it would be a pretty simple study to do. It just takes a long time.
Yeah, because what are you going to like? You can measure, let's say, increase in strength, performance, maybe VO2 if you can, depending on the population. And then if you want to, you can check the side effects. Like, is it more stress on any organ, or is it the same?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah,
at the end of the day, you
absolutely.
just cover that storage. It doesn't matter if you're going to put 1 billion in one day, or you're going to put a 1 billion in a month. At the end of the month, you can have 1 billion in your account, in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think somebody just has to do that study to show there is no difference. But obviously it has to be, there have to be enough subjects to find a difference if there is going to be a difference. So it's just, finding enough subjects to truly show convincingly to people that it doesn't matter if you cycle or if you do cycle, or maybe taking it continuously is better. I'm not too sure, but yeah, so somebody has to do that study. I feel like it's an important question to answer to the fitness industry or people that supplement with creatine. They really want to know that answer. So, yeah.
So just to sum it up, because you're really busy, creatine is safe.
Yep.
3 grams a day.
Yep. Easy.
Easy. We're not sure about caffeine. We're waiting to find out. So let's keep it simple. Just creatine with water. Don't be scared about getting some water.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because that, as you said, it can be an indication that you're. We both hate the word responder, but it's a good side effect.
Yeah.
And it's not only for the gains. It's for the brain. It's for our nervous system. It's good for older people. It's good for after a stressful period of time. Maybe people that don't sleep enough. They train too much. Quick question, because it just came up. A friend of mine, before when I posted that on Instagram, said, it just came up on my phone. That's why thank God I didn't forget. He would kill me. CK and CKMB. They see that sometimes with people that had a heart attack, and they saw a particular creatine kinase going high, and when they had, let's say, rhabdomyolysis, they had CPK really high.
Okay.
Why is that?
So there's so creatine, and then there's creatine kinase, or there's also creatinine as well that you can
Yeah.
measure. So those are indications that there's like muscle breakdown happening. And so if you take more creatine, you're going to have more creatinine as
Mm-hmm.
well. And so people sometimes, if they'll go to the doctor and they'll get their creatinine measured, the doctors will be like, "Whoa, what are you doing? Like, that's like, stop whatever you're doing. This is really bad." But it's not bad. It's associated with the creatine supplement. But having more creatinine is not a bad thing if you've been taking creatine. That's just, it's going to happen. So hopefully the doctors are knowledgeable about that pathway, and yeah, aren't too concerned about it. So,
And also the blood
but
tests are not for athletes, like it's for lay population. And that's sometimes, athletes get like, I've got a lot of people come to me, it's like, oh, my CPK is so high. And I'm like, well, if you rest 2 days, it's going to go
yeah,
down fivefold. So
yeah,
just chill. It's an adaptation to the stress you're putting to your body. If that wasn't that high, you would be dead. So chill.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's nothing to be concerned about. But yeah, I've gotten that question quite a bit as well. So people are like, "Oh, this is crazy. Like, my doctor says don't do it. It's unsafe." And I'm like, "No, it's safe. Your doctor just doesn't know this particular pathway or this supplement very well, especially with exercise." Yeah.
If you had a book or a specific website or anything that we can find more about what you're doing.
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess on PubMed, so you can go on PubMed and you can search up creatine and Forbes. You can definitely find quite a few studies there. Um, I also am on Instagram as well.
Yeah, I'm gonna put that
So
below.
yeah,
I
so
love
Scott,
your feed.
yeah, exactly. So if they want to contact me, that's probably the best way to contact me actually is on Instagram. But yeah, I don't have a specific website or anything like that to promote. So I'm just a researcher, a guy that does the science, and
And thank you
yeah,
for that. We need more of that.
yeah,
We need more of that. Scott, thank you so much for your time. Um,
no worries.
any questions come up, I will send them on your email or Instagram. And,
Absolutely.
have a happy new year, and hopefully I'll see you soon to another lecture of yours.
Awesome. Sounds good. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Have a good one.
Yeah, see ya.
Bye
Happy
bye.
New Year. Bye.
Happy New Year.